Hello, YouTube Sidekick here with another DCS Mission Editor tutorial video. Today we're going to take a little break from our Your First Mission series that we've been working on for the last few weeks, because I want to take a break and look at the new clouds and weather system that came in with DCS 2.7. We'll get back to the regular tutorials next week. So there's a few things we need to know about clouds before we can really understand what DCS is doing. So I want to do just a little whiteboard session, and then we'll go jump right into the mission editor and see how we can make clouds. So let's get started. So if we're going to talk about clouds in DCS, it helps to have kind of a basic glossary of terms that people use when they're talking about clouds. So clouds can be described two different ways: the types of cloud and the height at which they occur. So in terms of types of cloud, they're basically broken into layered, fluffy, or wispy. And in terms of the altitudes, not surprisingly, we have high, medium, and low, but we also have something called towering, which basically means something that really goes from low all the way up to high. So if we start looking at this chart in the top left, first we have cirrostratus clouds, which are those high, thin layers of clouds, often translucent that you see, but these will be basically very high up. Then we have cirrocumulus, which is when you have basically little specks of clouds very high up. And finally, we have cirrus clouds, which are kind of those horsetail, wispy clouds that you might see very, very high in the sky. Then at the second height, the medium height, we have altostratus, which basically means a medium level kind of overcast layer of clouds. And then we also have altocumulus, which will be the small, sort of more fluffy clouds, maybe even sort of coalescing together in a layer, but with fluffy tops, but again at medium height. Then at low level, we have stratus clouds, which is sort of the classic overcast, low overcast kind of cloud. Then we have cumulus clouds, which are your classic little white fluffy clouds. Stratocumulus, which is what happens when a whole bunch of cumulus clouds get together and basically form a layer, but they have fluffy tops. And then in the towering category, we have nimbostratus, which basically means a very, very thick layer of flat clouds. And then we have the classic cumulonimbus, which is what everybody thinks of when they think of thunderclouds, the big towering anvil-shaped thunderheads. Now, from what I can tell, DCS doesn't really model some of these cloud types. As we go through and look at the clouds, though, well, we'll take a look and see how many different of these sort of cloud types we can spot. They have acknowledged that they haven't really done anything with the towering category, although apparently they do have ambitions, and I think it'll be quite spectacular if they start being able to model cumulonimbus, but they're not there yet. Okay, one more thing we have to talk about before we jump into DCS is something called a METAR. This is because it's referenced in the cloud presets, as we'll see. METAR stands for Aviation Routine Weather Report. The presets use a METAR format to describe the actual preset, and that's why we need to know it. Now, an actual real-life METAR includes a whole lot of information other than just an information about the sky cover, but DCS has borrowed the METAR format to describe the layers of clouds in the preset, so we need to understand the terms here. So the terms you'll see in the METAR are few, which stands for basically up to 2/8 or 1/4 coverage of the sky. Scattered, which is from 2/8 to 4/8, so up to half cover of the sky. Broken, which is basically up to 3/4 coverage of the sky. And overcast, which is, not surprisingly, full coverage of the sky. And then the last thing in the METAR statement is height. Now, in a real METAR statement, height is given in hundreds of feet. DCS, I think, is using thousands of feet, so that's one small difference. You'll see what I mean when we get into the game and you see the statements. The last thing that I wanted to say is that, so there are a number of different presets, like 30. And they all, despite the way they're categorized, they all deliver quite different effects, which is really one of the things that makes this very exciting. Keeping track of what's in each of the presets, I found was a little bit of a challenge, hopping back and forth between all of the different MEDAR statements and trying to understand what that was going to look like. So I put together, because I'm a data nerd, I put together an Excel spreadsheet that kind of lays all of that out. Here's a picture of it. A version of that will be available on my Discord server if you want to go there and pick it up. But it also just points out that there's an awful lot of variability, a lot of different variations in the presets. So that's one of the things that makes this exciting. So let's jump right into DCS and see what all of that means. Okay, so here we are jumping into the DCS Mission Editor. We'll actually use the Mission Editor mission that we've been working on. It doesn't really matter what we use, but we're used to looking at this terrain, so it'll be interesting to see it with different cloud covers. So it's still under the same button here, the weather button. Now, before we go right into the presets, I actually want to look at the first preset, which is nothing. Which gives us something similar to what we've been using, but it does look quite different. So let's just look really quickly at what happens if we don't use one of the presets. We still have the option of picking the base of the clouds, the thickness of the clouds, and the density. So let's just leave it the way it was the last time we were in the game. So basically this is it's a mid-level layer of clouds, reasonably thick, and it's basically a scattered cloud layer, because it's 1/2 sky cover. So let's take a look and see what that looks like in the game. Okay, so let's go right to F10 and then Control F11. Now we're up really high. You can see we're up like 80,000 feet. So let's move down to around 40,000 feet and just take a look around. So it looks to me like what we have here is kind of, I'd call those alto cumulus layers. Basically, they're little white fluffy clouds, but they've all been sort of packed together in layers. Not sure how DCS goes about figuring out the size of each of the layers, but rather than getting individual fluffy clouds, which we used to get, now we get layers. So you see we get down below them. You can definitely see that they have dark bottoms, so they're thick enough to form a layer, and that's why we call them alto cumulus layers. Go down to the bottom and look up, and we basically get this. So this is kind of what medium-high scattered clouds looks like, which may be a little bit more cloud than you would think of when you think of the word scattered clouds, but based on the settings, that's what we got. So let's go back in and see what happens if we change some of those settings a little bit. So without changing the density, so staying at the scattered cloud layer, let's try and see what happens if we take really high clouds and we put a really thin layer of high clouds, still a scattered cloud layer, but it's up high and it's pretty thin. So let's see what that looks like in the game. Okay, here we are in the game. Once again, we're just going to go to F10, Control F11. We start up really high. So let's zoom down. I'm using the W key now, which is another new innovation. Anyways, okay, so let's take a look around. So yeah, you can definitely get the sense that this layer is thinner, a little higher up. Still, I don't know if it's high up enough. It's probably not high enough to call it cirrocumulus, but it's basically a very high altocumulus layers. Now, when we get down, you can still see that they're layers. They have slightly dark bottoms, but they're not looking quite as dark as they were before. If we go right down to the ground and look up, so now this looks more like what I would call scattered clouds. And so you can see that you can get that effect. What we've done is make them a very thin layer, and that means that some of the cumulus clouds are detached from the layers. And it's also thin enough that it's all basically white. There's hardly any gray. And you can also notice that DCS is added above the layer that we put in. There's a high layer of clouds that, I don't know whether I want to call that cirrostratus, maybe it's cirrus, but DCS is adding that for its own atmosphere. Okay, let's go back to the mission editor. And this time, let's take a look at making a low, thick layer of scattered clouds. So we'll take them down to, 5,000 feet, maybe a little lower, and make them about as thick as we can make them. And then we'll go back in, we'll see how much different this looks. Now, we haven't changed the sky cover. There's still scattered clouds. Quickly pop into the mission, go straight to F10 and Control F11. And okay, now we've got a lot more clouds. Let's go down again to something like 40 feet. There, we've gone through that sort of cirrostratus layer that DCS puts in. Yeah, I would definitely call these stratocumulus. You can see they have rounded tops, fluffy tops. You can see the textures a little bit when you look straight down on them, but it's at this angle, it's hard to notice that. So from here, they look like kind of nice white fluffy clouds. But look, if we go down below the layers to something around 4,000 feet there. So we're just below the layers. Okay, so now it's starting to look a little bit more overcast down here because the clouds are so low and so thick. So if we go right down to the ground, take a look up. So these are still scattered clouds, but now that they're low and thick, they certainly give the impression of covering a lot more of the sky than just half. And the other thing is that they would have a much more significant impact on a mission that you are flying. So we need to make sure that we understand that, the definition of sky cover, it's not just about sky cover, it's about the types of clouds and how thick the layers are as well. So let's go take a look at the actual presets now, which is really fun, really begins with this version of DCS. So same tab, but now when I click on nothing, I get this whole panel of different preset clouds. They're categorized as basically light scattered, high scattered, scattered, broken, overcast, and overcast with rain. And then as you can see, each one of the little panels has this little METAR statement like we talked about before. So high scattered 1 is described as 2 layers, a scattered layer at between 8,000 and 9,000 feet, and a few clouds at 21,000 feet. So that's what high scattered 1 looks like. High scattered 2 is a scattered layer at 8,000 to 10,000 feet, and a few clouds at 24,000 to 26,000. So, well, let's take a look and see what this looks like in game. Okay, so here we are in the game. Let's go to F10, Control F11. We're up about 80,000 feet. Let's go down. So there does seem to be a little layer that DCS puts in at 40,000 feet kind of every time. Now we're above all of the layers that are specified in the presets. You can see a couple of layers. It makes the clouds quite a bit more interesting than the ones that we created using just the sky cover there. So you can see we got 2 layers. Let's go down a little bit so we're below the high layer. And you can see we do have a layer of cloud up there. So that's what a few clouds looks like. They look pretty much like cirrostratus, cirrocumulus. Then we'll go down here until we're below the lower layer. Go all the way to the ground. And take a look, and so that's what high scattered 2 looks like. So you can see that's still quite a few clouds, and the lowest layer is reasonably close to the ground. And there's enough of them that it's going to make a difference when you're flying, looking for targets and that sort of thing. So even something that's categorized as high scattered, it's a pretty significant amount of cloud. So let's go back in and try a different preset. Okay, so let's see what else we got here. So what does light scattered look like? No, light scattered 2. This is interesting. This kind of reverses high scattered because we have the few scattered layer low down and the scattered layer high up. So let's see if that looks any really different from the high scattered one that we just looked at. Okay, so let's go down through the high sort of veil layer here. Take a look around. And this definitely looks like fewer clouds to me than the high scattered version did. Definitely fewer clouds. So let's go down a little bit more. Now we're below the high layer. And yeah, you can see the high layer doesn't look that much more prominent than in the high scatter, but definitely now we're looking much more like we get cumulus clouds and sort of stratocumulus. They don't really form a layer. And if we go all the way down to the ground, look back up. Yeah, that looks more like what I would call sort of light scattered clouds. So, and they're definitely not going to have as much of an impact on you being able to see the ground. So there definitely is a difference between light scattered and high scattered. Despite the fact that their descriptions sound similar, the way they look in the game is actually quite different. Some different presets. Now, there's 30 different presets. We'll be here all day if I go through them at that speed. So let's try and pick up the pace a little bit. Let's take a look at scattered 1. And maybe the easiest way to look at these is to bring in my little spreadsheet here. So this is scattered 1. Looks like it's going to be a fairly high scattered layer because it's got a layer at 14,000 feet and then another higher layer than that. So let's see what that looks like in game. Okay, so taking a quick look here, once we get below the veil, as I'm beginning to call it, yeah, that looks like fairly, now I would call that high scattered cloud layer. Certainly if you're in the ground attack business, it's probably going to be above the layer where it really makes a whole lot of difference to you. Because there are two different layers, you get a little bit of texture. It's a little bit more interesting than what we create without the preset, but basically this is what I would call your classic high scattered cloud layer, I think. Okay, so let's pick a different one. Let's pick scattered 4 this time. And this kind of points out that even though it's described as scattered like scattered 1, you're going to see from the chart it's quite a bit different because it's really quite a low scattered layer and fairly thick at the low level. So I expect this to look quite a bit different than scattered 1 did. Let's take a look. Okay, here we are. We're just coming down right above the top layer there. You can see the sky is quite a bit, I would say there's quite a bit more cloud than in scattered 1 for sure. It's an interesting sky though. This would look interesting at sunrise or sunset, I think. Lots of clouds to look at. As we get below the first layer cloud, you notice the light changes. That's kind of interesting as well. Okay, so yeah, a fairly extensive set of clouds there. Although they're still, on the verge between cumulus and stratocumulus, I would say. They're not quite making layers yet, although the bottoms are a little bit gray. So go all the way down to the ground, take a look back up. And yeah, that's it's a fairly extensive layer, and because it's lower down, definitely going to have an impact on gameplay. Okay, let's take a look at one more scattered layer, just because there's so many different effects you can get with scattered. This time I'm going to do scattered 6, and you'll notice that scattered 6 is actually quite a thick layer. It's all broken, but it's up really high. So let's see what that looks like in game. So yeah, from 40,000 feet, this is pretty much, it's called scattered clouds, but I would call that a lot more than 5/10 coverage of the sky. So the total thickness of the layer, is pretty thick. And then even down here, you see we get through the layers pretty quickly. This is almost, it's not really overcast, but it's close to it, but it's up really high. So, from a ground attack perspective, really not very much impact at all. But if you're flying around up above those clouds, they're definitely going to be affecting the way the game is played. Yeah, from the ground, this looks much more like scattered clouds from the ground than it did from up at 40,000 feet. Isn't that interesting? Okay, let's take a look at one of the broken layers. This time it's broken 3. As you can see, this is kind of just a thicker version of what we just had in scattered 6. We got 2 layers, one at 15,000 feet, one at 25,000 feet, but they should be a little bit thicker than they were in the last one. So let's take a look at this. Going down through the first layer. Okay, just above the first layer. Yeah, it looks like a fairly good sky coverage from there. Go down through the first layer. Take a look. Okay, yeah, we have a significant number of clouds up there at 25,000 feet. And then we got a layer below us. And when we get down to the ground, it's still pretty high, so it doesn't look like it's covering the sky too much, but there's definitely more coverage. So this is kind of a bump up from the last scattered version, I think. Okay, let's take a look at broken 2. Now, this kind of looks like what you'd think of as a classic broken clouds because it's kind of mid-level. Be an alto level about 8 to 10,000 feet, but it's one single level of broken clouds. Let's see what that looks like in game. Okay, here we are. Taking a look. It looks like there's actually multiple layers there. So the description's a little misleading. It looks like there's kind of multiple layers between probably about 10,000 and, yeah, 15, 16,000. So there we're below the first layer. There's definitely another layer. And so you got a really sort of thin band between the two layers. That's interesting. Okay, here we are below the lowest layer. It's definitely looking like broken clouds. And from the ground, yeah. Yeah, so now the clouds are getting a little bit closer to the ground. Definitely going to impose themselves on the mission a little bit more than before. Okay, let's take a look at one more broken preset. This is broken 7. As you can see, this is going to give us really quite thick clouds, not too low, starting at 9,000 feet, but then another completely overcast or broken layer at 23 and another one at 31. So this should give us a pretty full sky, but fairly high up, I'm thinking. So let's see what that looks like in game. Okay, there we are at 40,000 feet. Yeah, it's pretty much an overcast layer. Can't see a whole lot of the ground. Go down here a little. And you can see, yeah, this is a very interesting looking cloud layer, but definitely not seeing a lot of the ground from over 20,000 feet. Now we go through the layer. It's actually overcast. It's actually a little disorienting. Find the ground, get right side up again. Here we go. Yeah, so basically down here, we're talking overcast. Yeah, so from below the cloud layer, below about 9,000 feet, this is pretty much a fully overcast sky. So this is what I call high overcast. It's basically an altostratus layer with some cirrostratus, cirrocumulus above it. So let's just see what it would look like for interest's sake if we flew back up through the clouds. Yeah, so that's a pretty interesting picture as we fly up through the clouds, and then we definitely have that solid layer below and then a pretty good layer above. So it's a pretty interesting atmosphere that this particular broken 7 creates. Okay, let's take up the game a notch and take a look at some overcast conditions this time. Let's start with overcast 3. Picking overcast 3 because it's the highest overcast. So this is really what I would describe as a high overcast day. It's basically alto layers, but full layers both at 11,000 feet and at 18,000 feet. So let's see how that looks like in game. Right, so you can see just above the cloud tops here, it's basically a solid layer. Really fluffy down low, at least from the top. Let's go down a little farther. So now by the time we get down, yeah, it's a fairly thick layer. By the time we get down to 11,000 feet, though, it's completely overcast. So this is a gray day down below with just a little bit of sunlight sneaking through every once in a while. But pretty high up. So again, if you're attacking ground targets, 11,000 feet's your ceiling. That's a pretty good ceiling. Let's just fly up back through the keyhole, because there's still a few keyholes here. It's not just a solid gray layer, which is the difference between 2.7 and the earlier versions of DCS. And if we fly back up here through the clouds, that's a fairly dramatic feeling of flying through the clouds. We definitely get the feeling of surfing through the clouds. And you can see that there are multiple layers. And the light changes as we go up through the layers. Yeah, look at that. Look at that stratification. That's pretty neat. Very nice effect. Let's try the other end of the spectrum now. We'll try overcast 4, which is basically the lowest overcast. So now we're going to have overcast almost right down to the ground, 3,000 foot ceilings, and then that's going to repeat a couple times, Should be a fairly good space between the lower and the upper layer, though. So let's see what that looks like in game. Okay, here we are above the upper layer. Yeah, pretty thick overcast. Although there are spaces where we can see down through the layers and see the ground. So it's not completely uniform. A little bit of interesting there. We go through the mid layer. Yeah, well, the bottom layer isn't completely unbroken. But it definitely gives you the feeling of a ceiling above you here at this altitude of 17,000 feet. So let's go down a little closer, look around. Yeah, there's definitely get the feeling of 2 layers with this one. And let's see what it looks like when we go through the lower layer. Yeah, so now we get down on the ground. This is looking, well, it's not quite down to 3,000 feet as promised. It's a little bit higher than that. But still, this is pretty low overcast now, but there are some breaks. Okay, so that's overcast 4. Okay, let's take it up even another notch, and we'll go to the overcast and rain presets. There's 3 of these. So you can see this one gives us a visibility of 3 to 5 kilometers, rain, and an overcast layer between 3,000 feet and 15,000, another one at 28,000, and then we kind of have the veil, as I call it, at 40,000 feet. So let's see what that looks like in game. Okay, up high, it looks like pretty much another cloudy day in DCS world. Get down through the high layer. Okay, yeah, there's a distinct layer up high, and then, yeah, a lot of clouds. Even got a little bit of cumulus action happening on the top of this layer. That's kind of interesting. Get down through the middle layer. Yeah, and we're already into rain now. Already into the rain. Even at 8,000 feet, how high up do we have to go? So we have to actually get up into the clouds to get clear of the rain. Okay, so above that layer, no rain. But as soon as we go down below it, and we can see the rain kind of below the clouds. That's kind of a neat effect. Look at that. All right, so interesting. We're in a spot that wasn't directly below a cloud. We're not getting rain. That's interesting. Let's move over here a little ways. So still not getting rain unless we go straight through the cloud. That's interesting. But definitely you can see rain around us. And even though it's overcast and rainy, there are breaks in the clouds. And you can even see up to blue sky. That's very interesting. No rainbows, though. Okay, so let's go back in and dial the misery dial all the way to maximum, which for me has got to be overcast and rain 2, because overcast and rain 2 is visibility of just 1 to 5 kilometers, rain, overcast all the way down to 3,000 feet, and then some scattered clouds above that at 18 to 28, and then the veil, as they call it, up at 40. So let's take a look and see what that looks like in game. Okay, so go down to about 40,000 feet, take a look around. Looks like a cloudy day from up here. Let's see what happens. We go down around 20,000 feet. Somewhere around there. Okay, so yeah. And getting a little bit of volume in the bottom layer. And now as we go down, we're into the clouds at 15,000 feet. We're into the rain at 7,500. Oh, and we still see some light in the clouds up above, but it's pretty miserable down here. Now suddenly we're out of the rain. That's interesting. And down on the ground. Oh, maybe we're not. Maybe it's just when we're moving, we look like we're out of the rain. This looks like a pretty soggy day on the ground. There goes our SU-25 headed for brighter skies. Interesting. Okay, folks, I think that's going to do it for this Mission Editor tutorial. It's already gone on a little longer than I had wanted it to, but there's a lot to cover there. I think you definitely want to get into the Mission Editor and look at the presets yourself. As you can see, just the description of the presets doesn't necessarily tell you what you're going to see. You do have to look at that METAR statement, or if you like, you can come to my Discord channel. The link is in the description. You can grab that Excel file. I find it very helpful in planning what I want to see. But as you can see, The way the presets are set up, you can get an amazing number of different effects depending on what you're looking for. You've got layers, you got different heights, you got different thicknesses. So I think there's a lot to learn about it. Hopefully that's giving you an idea how to get started and what to expect when you do use it. And I hope that you enjoy creating your own missions. Please let me know how you make out. As always, if you want to keep the videos coming, the best way to do that is to like and subscribe. And hey, tell a friend. And for now, this is going to be Sidekick, signing off.